Hi guys, how are you doing today? Welcome back to Random Lifestyle Vlog. If you're new here, my name is Paulina and this channel is all about beauty, and that includes skincare, makeup and fragrances. So today we're going to be talking about another fragrance, and this is the newest addition to the kind of stiletto line by Herrera, and this is Good Girl Blush Elixir. Okay, so before I dive into like this particular fragrance, I think there's a little bit of a backstory needed here. So long story short, the original Good Girl fragrance was released in 2016 and it was an extremely popular fragrance. This is one of those fragrances that lasts a really long time and it has a really good sillage. So once it was popular, you knew it was popular because everyone smelled like that. That's, I guess, one of the reasons why so many people love this fragrance. But on the other hand, there are many people who like straight on dislike it. I used to adore this fragrance. This was my ultimate night out kind of scent. It was just so good. I mean, I still like it, don't get me wrong, I just don't really tend to use it as often as I used to. If I were to describe this fragrance, I would say this was like a floral gourmand. The main floral notes here were jasmine and tuberose, so very potent, long-lasting notes. And then we also have a lot of tonka, cacao, coffee, almond, and it was followed with like many more notes, but generally this was a very kind of sweet, strong fragrance. So since this fragrance was so popular, obviously there was a flanker released pretty much every year. Those flankers were all in this stiletto bottle and they definitely share the same DNA with the original fragrance, so that was quite easy to guess that this is still a flanker of the Good Girl. But then suddenly in 2021 this fragrance was released. We still have the stiletto bottle, but the name of this fragrance was Very Good Girl. So I think everyone kind of assumed this was going to be another flanker, but this turns out to be a completely separate fragrance. So as I mentioned before, the original Good Girl was a very strong night out kind of like appropriate fragrance, whereas this one is this fruity, floral, very bright, a very kind of spring summer type of fragrance, so something completely different. The main notes here are rose, lychee, I think there's some red currant as well. This is like a very sweet but also kind of like sour fragrance. It has this kind of like sharpness or like sourness to it, and this one was actually quite often compared to Delina by Parfum de Marly, and I can see why. I definitely can see why. This is definitely a similar type of fragrance. And then the following year, Very Good Girl Glam was released. So this was a very obvious flanker of the Very Good Girl fragrance, and it definitely was pretty similar. So this fragrance was still built around rose, but instead of the black currant note and lychee, here we have sour cherry and bitter almond. So because of that, this fragrance was a little bit like creamier, I would say, and had a little bit less of that kind of like sharpness or sourness. And finally, last year, this fragrance was released, and this is Good Girl Blush. So this one was a little bit confusing, at least to me, because it kind of looked like another flanker of like these fragrances. But then on the other hand, the name of this fragrance is Good Girl, so it's not another Very Good Girl. So I was a little bit surprised with that, but to be honest, it kind of makes sense because this fragrance seems to be a flanker of both the original Good Girl and Very Good Girl. It seems to be like a combination of both. So even though this combination kind of worked, I've always felt like you could achieve a similar kind of result by layering one of those kind of like original Good Girl fragrances with any of those like Very Good Girl ones. That would probably be a very similar kind of result. So this fragrance opened Very Good Girl style. So it was fruity, floral with a little bit of sourness. And then it slowly settled down to something that definitely reminded me more of the old Good Girl fragrances. So it was a more kind of like sexy, sensual, a little bit like deeper, and this brightness from the opening was pretty much gone. This fragrance doesn't have any rose, it has some peony instead. There's also a bit more vanilla, I feel like almonds a bit more pronounced. So that was quite a nice fragrance, although maybe a little bit redundant. So when I first saw that we have like another flanker, and it's like very closely related to this scent because this is Good Girl Blush Elixir, so it's definitely going to be similar to this one. I didn't really want to buy it, but then I read the notes and I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And let me tell you, it's good, okay? So first of all, this is the bottle, and I actually really like it. I like it so much better than this one, and like 100 times better than, for example, this one. This is probably one of the worst bottles in my opinion, at least, okay? I just didn't like the way it looked. But this one, so nice. Now the notes. So the top notes here are bergamot and mandarin orange. Then we have middle notes of lang lang and rose. And then base notes of patchouli and vanilla. Okay, so where do I even start? I mean, this fragrance is just one of those that I just can't really stop sniffing my skin when I just spray it on. I find it very hard to believe that I like a flanker of a good girl so much, honestly. So this fragrance opens with this blast of fruity sourness, but it just lasts for like a few seconds. And then it literally settles down, and what you get is mostly patchouli and yellow florals, and that's obviously embedded with some like citrusy notes and vanilla, and it's just so good. I don't know what I like about this fragrance so much, but I just can't. I think it's so good, and I'm not exaggerating, but this is my favorite good girl flanker ever. Just like the original good girl fragrances, this one is definitely more suitable for like a big night out, not necessarily a very springtime, summertime fragrance. It does have some of those kind of like fruity, floral, kind of like bright notes, but the general vibe of the fragrance is much more like sexy, dark, mysterious. It's also pretty strong, so obviously not too office friendly. So if you want to compare these two fragrances together, I would say this one makes much more kind of like sense as a separate fragrance. I think it definitely offers much more than this fragrance. This is just like a mixture of two previous fragrances. This one is definitely something more. It is stronger, it lasts better, and this kind of like brightness from the opening, it kind of stays throughout the lasting of the fragrance. So it's not something that smells almost like very good girl that with time changes to something that smells like a good girl. It's its own fragrance throughout the whole lasting. In fact, this fragrance is pretty linear. Obviously, I'm not really talking about this initial kind of like fruity, soury kind of like burst that opens this fragrance and that kind of like settles down after a few seconds, but other than that, I think this fragrance is pretty linear. It changes slightly with time, but it's just still going to be the same fragrance pretty much. The lasting power obviously is really good. I mean, I would be surprised if it wasn't. The sillage is pretty strong too. As much as this fragrance is definitely a combination of good girl and very good girl, I think this one actually makes sense. I think they managed to create a fragrance that stands out so much more than this one here. I love it. So definitely a fragrance I recommend, but I also recommend testing it before buying. I don't think this is going to be a super safe blind buy unless you're like a massive good girl fan and you have all the fragrances from the good girl and very good girl range and you love them all, then I'm pretty sure you're going to like this one as well. But other than that, I would not necessarily risk blind buying it because I know I love it, but we're all different. But since this is quite a prominent, strong fragrance, I would not necessarily recommend blind buying it because you never know with these fragrances. It might just not agree with your skin and then you're just stuck with a bottle that you're not going to like. Anyway guys, have you tried this fragrance? If so, let me know your thoughts about it in the comment section down below. Thank you very much for watching. For more fragrance related content, check those videos over here. I'm going to see you very soon. Take care. Bye!